This video is now in session, and Texas has just voted, or at least Texas's 6th district has just voted in a special runoff election. And in that runoff election, it was between two Republicans, Susan Wright and Jake Ellzey. Now, this race is not super important and is not completely indicative of what will happen in 2022, but nonetheless, it is a special House race, which is pretty notable as there have already been a few House races that have happened so far in 2021, including in Louisiana's 2nd district, Louisiana's 5th district, and as well as elections that will come in Ohio, elections that have already come in New Mexico's 1st district, and then another election, a special election for the House of Representatives in Florida. So for this election, Jake Ellzey is the moderate GOP candidate, while Susan Wright represented more of the right-wing Trump brand of politics. Now, originally, Susan Wright was the moderate in this race, while Jake Ellzey was the anti-Trump candidate, but it shifted more towards moderate versus very conservative. And in this race between moderate and very conservative, the moderate won in this race, which in some ways was surprising, but at the same time wasn't super surprising. Susan Wright, the fact that she moved more to the right after the initial voting in the jungle primary indicated an easy loss for her, because Texas's 6th district is not really a Trump district. They only went to Donald Trump by 3 points in 2020 compared to 2016, where it was a 12-point margin between Trump and Hillary Clinton. And Cook rates this seat as Republican +6, as in it leans towards the Republican Party by 6 points. So it's not a super conservative district, and in fact, it's gotten more liberal over the years, especially because of Tarrant County, which is where Fort Worth is. That is where Jake Ellzey got most of his vote from, and that's the main reason why he won in this race. Democrats certainly helped to get Jake Ellzey into this position. Jake Ellzey, he won with Democratic votes in Tarrant County during the runoffs because there was no Democrat in the runoff races. You can see Jake Ellzey won 12,700 votes in the Tarrant County, while Susan Wright won 11,300. So that's a split between 53% and 47% here. You can see that replicates in Ellis County. And even though Susan Wright won in Navarro County, even though it's very conservative, it's not really that big in terms of its population compared to Tarrant County and Ellis County. Tarrant County is the main reason why this congressional district exists, at least in terms of population. And then Ellis County is in the middle, and then Navarro County is the least impactful. So in terms of what to take away from this race, there's not really much to take away, because even though Jake Ellzey, a moderate and practically an anti-Trump candidate, won in this race against a Trump-endorsed candidate where both candidates were Republicans, it's not really reflective of what will happen nationwide, because we do expect to see something different in the 2022 election, where conservative candidates that are backed by Trump are more likely to get through the primaries. But what is interesting to take away, though, is that Donald Trump lost in a race that he endorsed. He endorsed the losing candidate in this race, and Trump obviously does not want to endorse a losing candidate, yet he did. So in terms of whether or not he will continue to endorse, that will be that will be interesting. But more importantly, if Trump continues to endorse in competitive elections, in elections in moderate seats where they might not necessarily always vote for Republicans by strong margins, then we can see a situation where Democrats can actually ride on Trump's coattails one more time in the 2022 elections if Democrats characterize Trump or if they characterize certain Republicans as Trump candidates, as right-wing candidates, the same way how Republicans portrayed Democrats as socialists in the 2020 election. And that certainly could sway some of the momentum back towards the Democratic Party, essentially having the Democrats do the same thing that Republicans did in the 2020 election by portraying the other party as too radical. And if Democrats are able to do that, they could potentially win if they juxtapose that with their own candidates being more moderate, being more open to bipartisanship, and as well as necessary bipartisanship, not just partisan bills or bills that only pass with Democratic majorities and no Republican votes at all. An example of that would be the American Rescue Plan. But if Democrats are able to juxtapose that and compare the two visions in 2022, then they could have a good chance of not bombing the 2022 race. It's still very highly unlikely for them to win a majority in the U.S. House, but they could certainly deflect some Republican strongholds or some Republican force by portraying the Republican Party as a whole and House congressional members, Republican congressional members like Nancy Mace of South Carolina's 1st District, I believe, as a right-wing candidate, as a Trump representative that defended Trump even during the January 6th insurrection. So if Democrats do that, it could be interesting because we see here in this race that Susan Wright, a Trump-endorsed candidate, lost in a moderate district. So even though there's not really much to take away from this race because only 39,000 people voted in this race, we can take away the fact that Donald Trump is certainly has some impact in these House races and will have impact in one way or another in the 2022 House race. But that's not really much to take. That's not really much new to take away from this race, and it's again primarily because there hasn't been enough people that voted in this election to justify that kind of claim, or at least cement that claim. If you look at the 2020 election and what happened there, you can compare 39,000 people and 39,000 votes to 339,000, almost 340,000 votes. That's a very big difference in terms of voter turnout, and that could actually be a takeaway from this race, which is that voter turnout might be incredibly hard in 2022 for both the Republican and Democratic parties, not just the Democratic Party, because there isn't really much reason for a lot of people who voted in 2020 to vote in 2022 because there is no Trump factor and because it's more of like a regular election. So that could also be that could be one major thing to take away from this race, because that is something that has been replicated in other special elections throughout this year, including in New Mexico and as well as in Louisiana. But besides that, unfortunately, there's not really much to take away from this race in terms of a big swing towards Tea Party Republicans come 2022, or if Democrats can actually get a majority in 2022. So, I mean, there's not much to take away from this race other than Jake Ellzey, a moderate, won against Susan Wright, a Trump-endorsed candidate, and the fact that only 39,000 people voted in this election. So that's the end of this video. Hope you enjoyed it. This video is now adjourned, and I'll see you in the next one.